I knew it. I knew it. Should have brought my World War II book. We could have wowed and dazzled you all with our vast array of historical knowledge and compare it to this film and tell you, was it right? Was it wrong? Was it somewhere in between? Welcome everybody to Drac and Shadow Vlogs. I of course am Shadow Blazer. He is Drac.
And I got nothing.
And we're the Drac and Shadow Bunch. And we just got out of Dunkirk, the new movie by Christopher Nolan.
So, yeah, welcome everybody to Drac and Shadow Vlogs, and just in case people are not aware of the new format, or if you're new here, we used to go over spoiler-esque material. We don't anymore, and in some cases...
We still do spoilers. We just don't do
we just don't go plot point for plot point. So... And especially with historical movies, it doesn't really
matter much.
It doesn't really matter because, well, okay, I'm taking this away now. Because otherwise, Alex is going to fiddle with it.
I was going to put it over, but there's nowhere to put it.
You're going to put it over so it's ready for its match at WrestleMania?
Yes.
Okay, all right. With historical movies, it's also kind of pointless to go over a movie point for point because you can literally look up how the battle went.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, it might have been helpful to have some kind of historical reference, but I don't know every single battle of World War II off the top of my head or what happened in them.
I don't think anybody does. That's a lot of battles.
Yeah, and especially like I struggle with the U.S. battles alone, and this is really a European battle before the U.S. even stepped in. So this is basically the Germans cutting off the
British and the French.
The British and the French and occupying their territories until the U.S. came in and freed them, kind of thing. But this is literally how it happened. They got blitzkrieged all the way to the beaches and and resolved to resist as much as they could. So I don't know if there's a whole lot to go over, especially in this film, because it is also a war film. And, you know, I don't mean to sound rude, but the actors weren't necessarily the showcase of the film. It was the events itself. It was the territory they were in. It was the situation they were in. And so in a lot of cases, you know, like, we had really good actors in there, but...
They did the job they needed to do.
Well, I'm not saying they did a bad job, but they weren't the focus. Yeah, so they did the best. They did the best that they could, but they knew right off the bat. You know, it's like with a story like Saving Private Ryan, where that is about a soldier.
Yeah,
that's where an actor can take center stage in a war movie. But in most war movies, it is the setting that you're in. It is the terror that you're feeling. That is the scene setter and therefore the centerpiece kind of thing. So again, I'm not discounting the actors. I think they did a great job. But really, the focus here was not the actors. The focus here was not the people.
Yeah.
It was the situation.
Yeah, this really isn't as much of a character-driven film as you might believe it would be. This really is all about...
I've only known like a few war movies that actually tried to have a character focus. Private Ryan's one.
I think most of them do. Every war movie I've ever seen does.
No, where the situation... eclipses the actors? Because I could think of a dozen movies that do that.
I really can't think of it. Almost every war movie I've ever seen, it's always been about the people.
The time where I would say that it's flipped is Private Ryan's one, because that is the situation. Yeah. You're trying to get Private Ryan out of there. The other one that comes to mind is...
But you still
was it The Patriot? Was that the one that Mel Gibson did that was the Revolutionary War? Where it was based around a family. That makes a lot of sense. But in a movie like, say, Black Hawk Down or We Were Soldiers, it's really the war and the setting that you're in that takes center stage there. The massacres that were happening, kind of thing. So I do think that there's a little bit of a difference. And really, I'm overstepping myself. I'm not saying anything bad about Tom Hardy, Mark Rylance, Kenneth Branagh, I think, was in there.
Yep. Cillian Murphy.
Yeah. We're not saying anything bad about them, because their performances are what they needed to be for that given moment.
Yeah, because this is a very much, I think, as close as you're going to get to to a dramatic documentary here.
Yeah.
This is way more documentarian than dramatic reenactment.
And truth be told, you could have had those characters in the movie like being interviews in a documentary, and it wouldn't have affected anything. And simply because the shots sold it more than the actors did, and that's by design, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So again, historical events. We're not even going to go over plot point by plot point, but let's start into the positives because that's where we can.
Yeah. Well, let's throw this out real quick. For anybody who's really not sure what this is, very, very briefly, very basic, this is a World War II movie. This is about the evacuation of Dunkirk, where a group of British and French soldiers were basically held up in one little French city on the coast and surrounded by Germans. They'd taken the city, but Germany was pushing back to retake the city, and the whole concept of the movie is the British soldiers and the French soldiers are trying to get out. And that's the whole movie. And that's why I say it's why we agree. It's very documentary style because it's not very much a character-driven film like a lot of war movies. This is very much driven by the event. And therein I think is kind of my positive, how it is so raw, but it's not. But a lot of times.
Well, I would add on to that. The other thing that they tried to showcase is the mercilessness of the Germans. Because not only was this, here's the thing. Like, a typical war movie has those meat grinder moments where it's going to be gory, it's going to be bloody, and it's meant to be that way. And I actually will applaud this movie for not going into the cannon fodder moment or the meat grinder moment as so willingly as other movies have. Instead, the way they do that is they don't showcase it by having the casualties happen in front of you. They showcase through the eyes of the people there just how merciless the Germans are, just how much they are sitting ducks or fish in a barrel in this evacuation.
Yeah, because they literally just all they can do is stand on the beaches and hope boats will come and take them.
Yeah.
But of course, that makes them prime, easy targets for German Luftwaffe to come in and shoot them and drop bombs on them. And yeah, the Germans are pretty ruthless in this movie. They bomb even hospital ships, which, by the way, is a war crime. And it is absolute meat grinder, but it isn't gory.
Another positive that I actually will put in there, because I think it's just best for us to bounce into positives here.
Yeah.
Again, I pointed out the mercilessness of the Germans. A lot of war movies that I've seen, and I haven't seen many. Heaven forbid, I can't even watch all of Private Ryan. Like, I can't watch the meat grinder moments. Whereas in, like, We Were Soldiers and Black Hawk, I can watch them a little bit. In this case, though, the only way you know the enemy in a war movie a lot of the time is the bullet coming and hitting the hero kind of thing. You don't necessarily see a enemy soldier perspective per se. I want to say Black Hawk Down probably had one, but
occasionally,
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think too many. This one actually did try to showcase the Germans as an enemy. Now, a lot of it was through random bullet fire, but the bombers were really the showcase there of how merciless the Germans were at this point and how they didn't care what ships they were taking down so long as they took down enemy soldiers. So at that point, I'll actually say that's a positive. That was a really great highlight to be able to show the mercilessness of the enemy, and actually and to some extent the enemy having a face. Because remember, at the very end, they actually did have German soldiers there. So
very briefly, but I wouldn't say they gave him much of a face in this movie. They really are a little more faceless compared to some other movies, I'd say.
Okay.
Because Black Hawk Down, you do see a few key Somali soldiers who are stalking the Delta Force and Army Rangers, and this one you really don't. Sometimes it's a little tricky to tell who's who beyond just who's firing and who's on the prowl and the attack.
Well, but the way I actually say it is because of how detached they had become to war was not something they felt. War was something that they felt detached from, kind of thing. Because, yeah, sure, we had some random fires in the streets, but when you have a bomber, I don't know if have you ever seen the MASH episode where they helped out the bomber pilot?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden he gets to actually see what he's been bombing. That's kind of how that felt like to me. Is like that's how detached these soldiers were. They didn't care that who they were bombing just so much as they hit their targets, kind of thing. And so I do think that lends at least a little bit of a face to the Nazi threat. Because here's the thing, they didn't care about using bombers on civilian targets.
Yeah.
So I'll lend that as a positive. I mean, do you have a positive? Well, I think of some other ones, or
yeah, the photography is great in this movie. There are some great shots.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my favorites is, I mean, there's a lot of great flying shots, but one of the flying shots is kind of the plane some of the shots where the plane is sort of straddling the beach, where it's flying literally across the sunset.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a really amazingly photographed movie. This is a really beautiful looking film. Christopher Nolan knows how to get his shots.
I would actually say a lot of the really beautiful shots, and this is going to sound morbid, but because Nolan actually did a really great job of showcasing the horror of war. One in particular was the beach shot, where the first bombing, where we had the one guy who's like, screw it, I'm just going to fire at these guys, and eventually he goes up in the air. I thought that was actually a really good shot, especially when everything around you, aside from that one soldier as a focal point, is another soldier ducking. And I actually expected them to do the plop, like have that meat grinder moment where he plops down, and they didn't, because it didn't matter. And I'll applaud that. The other one is, and I never like these shots in movies, but this one, it was done well. And part of that is because you never get at the right angle to do it. In particular, I think the only other movie I've seen do it right was, I can't remember what it was called, but we saw it last year. It was with Chris Pine.
Finest Hours.
Finest Hours, where in the belly of a ship, people, I don't like, those shots always look really good in submarine movies and all that, but people don't understand like the sheer horror of what happens when you actually do spring a leak. What happens when a torpedo hits your ship? It's not minutes that you like. It's not trickle, and then boom. It's boom.
Yeah.
And the fact that we got to see the water rush in, and we even got some underwater shots of like the humanitarian effort that was happening below the ship, with some teacups and some bread with jam like floating in the water. It sounds really morbid to appreciate that, but you need to for me, that's, if you could showcase that as a horrifying scene, that's selling war.
Yeah, it's me. Putting the weight to it. It's putting the weight to,
because that's really what you're doing in a war movie, is your shots are selling the horror. Your shots are selling, the massacres that are happening around you. And so at that point, and again, I think the Finest Hour was the only other one that I could think of that did a shot like that when we had the ship splitting in two. Like, here's my example that people are gonna get offended by. There are points in Titanic where it does feel artificial. Okay, there are points where you can very clearly see they are transitioning into the CG. This one, not so much, and it's always at a really weird angle, so you can't get a full view of the room. This gave us a full view of the room, and gave us a full view of, like, I'm almost surprised we didn't have, because, if there was enough pressure, the above deck door would thump right off. And I was almost expecting that to happen, but then we got the highlight of the soldier trying to open it, so to try and save his buddies. So I'll agree with you. The cinematography is really well done here, but as much as the optimistic scenes are great, and I agree with you, they are, the moments that really did steal the show for me were seeing that subtle torpedo go and hit the hull and knowing what's going to happen, kind of thing. I think they did really, really well there. Other positives?
It's a really intense movie. I mean, you'll be on the edge of your seat the whole 2 hours here. You're just, it's unrelenting how really intense and kind of scary this movie is. It really kind of reminds me of Gravity from a few years ago, the way that was very edge of the seat for the entirety of the movie. That was 90 minutes. This is a 2-hour movie, so and I wasn't even totally sure it was 2 hours because the time just went by so quickly. I never was bored. You're just going to be consistently, your attention's going to be focused. So, praise to that.
I didn't necessarily have that feeling. For a good portion of the movie, I had that. But then I started to notice some recycled shots, and that can take me out a little bit. So I'm not saying that it wasn't entirely there, but like especially in the plane scenes, you got to see a lot of recycled shots. And so at that point, I'm like, yes, I get it. They're adjusting the throttle. And yes, I get it. They're adjusting their fuel. They're trying to figure out what they're... I actually thought that was a really cool idea that they were writing... Because this is something that would happen. Like, you're writing your fuel supply, how much you've got left onto your dashboard. And I wish we would have seen that more. Instead, that last pilot, we kept on getting a zoom in on his fuel gauge where he got to switch it into reserve. Those are the kinds of things that are... I'm not saying bad, because you need to have those moments, but it was very clear that it was probably all shot in one plane. Just so that they could have that moment. And I'm saying just those moments because here's the way that you know it's recycled. The pilot's face wasn't in it at all. Because every pilot shot did look somewhat unique. Like, I could see different eyes within the goggles and all that. But yeah, there were a couple of shots here and there that I felt were recycled.
Well, there was only, like, 2 pilots.
I think there were 3.
3. One, I think, bailed out pretty early. We followed one to the very end where he ran out of fuel and bailed and ditched on the beach.
No, there was another one that got hit by a German fighter.
Right.
2. So there was 3.
There's 3. And then we lost 2 but midway through the movie, and then we followed the 3rd to the very end.
Yes, you follow the 3rd to the end.
Right. And that's because this movie's non-linear, so it's a little... I don't think there were that many recycled shots. I think it's just because this movie's non-linear, we're jumping around at different points of time. It's kind of easy to maybe lose track, and because we've said this isn't as much of a character-driven story as much as it's a giant ensemble film.
No, the only recycled shots I know is for plane. That was it. Like the boat stuff, the beach stuff, that's all genuine. That was all legit shots. It's just a couple of those, and again, I'm saying they were very few and far between, but they did take me out of it. And it was just like, oh, we're adjusting the throttle again. Okay, well, that's the exact same scene we've seen before. And I'm okay with it, but, you know, we don't need to know that he's adjusting the throttle because we already know the fighter's right in his sights. He's adjusting the throttle. So, but yeah, I'll agree with you. The cinematography was actually really, really great. The shots were well done. I can't even fault Nolan for going to his usual grayscale because in a lot of cases the usual grayscale actually worked for the grim situation that they were in. Any other positives that we got? Or
it is a well acted film. I mean, we've said it that the actors, even if they're not really there to stand out, they do their job very well. Yeah. So there's no point where an actor feels that they're phoning it in. Well, everybody's doing a good job.
And truth be told, like with a Nolan film, actors are really where you start to see the Nolanisms. And I'm not saying that these actors didn't have Nolanisms. There was one, but I'm going to not fault it because that Nolanism was essential at that point. It was the guy they pulled out of the water who's like, no, you can't go there. If you go there, we'll die. Because you did see like maybe there was a little bit too much emphasis on the seriousness of his look on there, but you needed that because how else is it? I'll compliment them a little bit because a shell-shocked soldier is not going to deliver an answer that coherently. They're going to be like, hell no, get out of here, I'm taking the wheel. I'm actually surprised it took, 3 jumps to that ship before he tried to take over the wheel?
Yeah, probably about that.
Yeah, so at that point I'm like, A guy who's going through legit shell shock is taking it that first opportunity he gets.
I think you should be a little careful. Don't call things. You're not a psychologist.
No, I'm not. But but I'm looking at it from like my perspective. If I was shell shocked, I didn't want to go back. I would be grabbing that wheel as fast as I possibly could. But yeah. So negatives. Were there actually negatives of Dunkirk?
You go first.
I think there was. I'm actually going to say the cinematography a little bit because there were shots that I didn't necessarily get the importance of.
Like?
This is going to... I'm trying to think of a way to be able to say this without being a pissant, because it's nitpicking, but the opening scene where we're in an empty town, or an empty city, I thought that dragged a little bit, and the only reason I think that it dragged is because it took, 5 minutes? 3 to 5 minutes before the first gunshot was fired. And up until that point, it is quiet city. And I get that that's a good scene setter. To me, it's not lazy, but it's annoying. Because it's like, there's too much quiet in this damn movie! So at that point, again, that's a nitpick, but there are a couple of points like that moment where the cinematography kind of goes against itself, but it's taking care of most of the movie, so I can't necessarily fault it that much.
Well, it sounds more like a complaint in the story more than it is in the photography of the empty city.
Yeah, a little bit, but I mean, my only complaint with it was that we could have easily gotten to them being shot at a little bit quicker. Because, I mean, if this is a German overrun city, which it was, and the way that they made it sound like after that gunshot was fired, like every corner was covered, then I just sit there and go, the Germans wouldn't have waited for you to go and look into the windows of certain houses. They'd be shooting at you. But again, it's a nitpick if I can even call it a legitimate complaint. It's more of a nitpick.
All right.
I
suppose a negative for me would be this movie's a little bit loud, a little bit noisy.
War movies are, though.
I mean, I know that's to be expected with a war movie, but I guess it's just I'm used to call me old-fashioned, kind of the structure of a lot of dramatic war movies like this, where you do have the quiet scenes interspliced with the action scenes, but because this movie's non-linear and jumps a lot, and the only problem is it sometimes made it hard to understand what people are saying, especially when they're...
I'll agree with that.
When you have a bunch of those soldiers held up in like a burnt out like boat or something, and they think one of them's a German spy, it's a French soldier.
And you can't even hear the guy saying "Parlez-vous français."
Yeah, you could barely hear that he was French, and
you couldn't even read his lips. He was going so fast. So at that point, it's like, yeah, I would like to hear what he actually says, because here's the thing. A lot of his mouth motions could have been Dutch, or it could have been German. And it took the second or third time for me to go, oh, he's French. Okay. Right. You know?
Yeah, and because this is an ensemble film, even though he's from the beginning, because we see him burying the soldier and changing uniforms.
Well, because for a second there, I'm like, oh, damn it, he is German. You know, like you don't want him to be a German soldier because you don't want him to die, but at the same time, I'm just like, then I see the mouth motion, like, oh, crap, he is, isn't he? Oh, no. Here comes the meat grinder moment. And thankfully, they did like a second and a third, and it was like, probably we would say, oh, he's a French soldier. Okay, he wanted favoritism here. Which, look, if we had not had a scene that happened probably an hour before this, you wouldn't have understood that scene. You probably wouldn't have, like, because you have to have that moment where they're all trying to get on the boat and the French soldiers are being told no.
Yeah.
For us to understand why he took a British uniform, so that he could get on quicker and get out of there quicker. I'll agree with you. The sound design was a little loud here and there. Probably I'm not gonna say unnecessarily, but it was bordering on it. And then there were also points where it was actually a lot more quiet than it needed to be. One moment in particular I can say is the torpedo, because when you have a water trail like that, it's gonna make consistent sound, and there were a couple points where that went quiet.
Right.
So that kind of bugged me. I actually want to say the bombing wasn't loud enough, because we didn't have like those major moments where, you know, your eardrums are shattered, and you have to you have the ringing in your ears from the camera. So I'm gonna say that's a little detached from it. And then the contrast there was like the guns on an airplane were amazingly loud.
Yeah. Yeah, the sound levels
I don't know this for certain, but I've seen enough documentaries to actually know, like, you'd probably hear the engine over the guns, kind of thing. Like, that engine would be consistently loud. And I get it, war movie, guns have to be loud so that you know that they're being fired. But there was a couple of moments where I'm like, oh, wow, THX is working really great right now. I'll also say that the score was unnecessarily quiet in a lot of moments that it needed it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very Zimmer score.
Yeah, but, no, I actually just, like, I'm not saying, like, he intentionally picked quiet instruments or anything like that. I'm saying somebody took the gain and just turned it down a little too much for that to help with the emotion of the scene. Because there were a lot of moments where I'm like, I really would have liked to hear this music, like, going on longer than it did. And it took too long for the music to start getting into the shot. What I mean, like, turned up enough so that we can actually recognize it.
Because it's a lot like the Dark Knight score, where it's just a lot of droning and kind of soft synth electronic.
I'd probably be more along the lines of Dark Knight Rises kind of thing, because I remember that music not being all that memorable. I agree with you, Dark Knight had issues, but a lot of the same issues that I'm thinking of, I think happened more in Rises here. I can't really think of any other negatives aside from the audio, and some of the shots could have been cut down a little bit more, and impact wouldn't have been hurt. In fact, I think it would have elevated them. Yeah, I can't really... I mean, have you got anything?
Not really.
Okay.
Because I really enjoyed the movie. I can't think of too much really wrong with it.
I mean, aside from my only gripe about... I don't see a whole lot of war movies anymore, and the reason I don't is because it really feels like you need a Prozac right after. And that's how it's supposed to feel. But I already have enough sad going on in my life. I don't necessarily need to have more. So, like... For a war movie, I would actually say that this did the job it needed to.
Yeah, I mean, real fascinating story, because you don't get a lot of British perspective films, a lot of World War II movies.
But I do agree with you. It was non-linear enough that it did impact the story a little bit. If they hadn't had so many jump cuts, just to say, this film's erratic because war's erratic, then I don't think it would have hurt. It probably would have endeared us to a few of the characters if we hadn't had so many jump cuts here and there.
Yeah, because that's why it's very unusual. But I guess in that sense it needs to be unusual. I mean, there's only like 20 million World War II movies out there and
that's not counting the History Channel.
The History Channel doesn't even do it anymore.
It's like, we can't do World War... It's like Call of Duty. Call of Duty did that for 10 years. Like, we can't do World War II anymore.
Except for...
Everyone's seen it.
Yeah, then they did Modern Warfare. Now they went back to World War II.
It's been 10 years. We can do it again.
Oh.
We're inventive writers.
It's just... It's a game for multiplayer. That's really what it is at the end of the day.
It is.
So I'll give it praise, though, for being different from the norm. I mean, it could have easily been another attempt at a Private Ryan and probably been okay, but I appreciate the ambition here.
I will applaud this for not having that meat grinder moment. That's the one part in a war movie I can never stand. Because I don't need to know that meat grinder moments happen in war. I already know they do. I don't need to see that graphic display of them happening. So, and there were a couple of moments like, okay, here it comes. And then, oh, okay, well, we got casualties, but we didn't see them get ripped apart by gunfire. Cool. Because you still have the impact, but we don't have to have the guts. So at that point, I'll compliment it in that regard. For a war movie, it didn't stick to necessary tropes. And I'm gonna compliment it for that, because I always feel like those moments, they take away from the film because you know exactly why they're there. They're meant to, and they're meant to, not desensitize, but they're meant to inflame you. They're meant to make you feel the raw emotion that you're supposed to be feeling. And to me, it's too easy for a war movie, especially when we're talking like where war movies started and the whole John Wayne aesthetic. Like, it's too easy to have that moment where you see them go blah, 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 blah.
Well, John Wayne movies, I don't think really did that. John Wayne movies were all about rally around the flag, boys.
Well, I'm talking like 50s, 60s kind of war movies. Like, I'm your buddy, and I'm totally not gonna die before this. And yeah, it's like, dude, you're dead. You just admitted you're gonna die.
Yeah, no obvious red shirt moments here. It's just, so yeah, that's.
I mean, that trope is about as familiar as, you know. I hate to go down this road, but black guy dies first in a horror movie. Yeah. It's about as prevalent. So yeah, I guess. So positives and negatives. Let's get into final verdict. Where does Dunkirk stand with you?
I'd say for me it's a solid 9.5, 9.5.
See, now you're gonna make me be mean. I'm gonna give it a B. I'm gonna give it a solid 8.
Okay.
Out of it. Just because. I mean, already I was kind of walking in the negative zone because it's a war movie and I don't like doing those because walking into depression. But considering, and also like I was worried I was gonna get meat grinder moments and I was gonna walk out all nauseous, and for this one I'll at least give it that credit that it didn't go that way and it found other ways to showcase the horror of war without having all the blood.
And without having all the, you're my pal, and then boom, 5 seconds later he's dead. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is not We Were Soldiers or Black Hawk Down. And I mean, I love Black Hawk Down. That's like one of my favorite movies ever. But it's just nice to see a movie break the mold every so often.
Well, and the other thing too is like Dunkirk is probably the first war movie I've seen, I want to say, since We Were Soldiers. Like legit war movie. Because I know that there's been like The Lone Survivor and American Sniper that have happened, and I've already had that argument numerous times of, you need to watch it because you need to be patriotic, and I disagree. I don't necessarily need to see the horrors of war when I already know them. All you have to do is read a book and you can hear and you can envision them, kind of thing, because some of those war books get really descriptive. So at that point, I mean, I was already kind of walking in from a negative standpoint. So for a lot of people who are going to say, well, you graded it less. I graded it higher than I thought I was going to.
Yeah. I
mean, I was literally walking into this movie, it was going to be a 5, you know? Just like, I don't want to go a war movie. I don't want to be depressed. So at that point, the fact that it's got a solid B, yeah, I have no problem recommending that. As far as pricing goes, really just like, I'm only recommend MartAnimE on this one because I don't see any. I mean, obviously we're just coming off of Dunkirk's opening weekend, so people who have seen it or wanted to see it in prime time have seen it. There's nothing really that stands out for Dunkirk that you couldn't get as cheaply as possible.
If you need the cheap viewing, then yeah, but I wouldn't mind recommending this to IMAX, considering there were scenes shot with the IMAX camera. So that at least says, hey, there is some incentive to see IMAX. It's not a post-production blow-up.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to recommend that just because if I wanted to see it in IMAX, I would have. And I would have doled out the extra money. But for me, movies are more of an experience now that are supposed to be positive and upbringing. And so I'll save the IMAX money for Star Wars. Let's just put it that way. Yeah, and I'm just, like I said, I'm just going to say matinee because, again, it's a war movie. They do have, after the first weekend, they do have a bit of a fixed audience. And that fixed audience is probably going to want to go in during the early parts of the day. So, and I think that actually does it for us for Dunkirk. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll be back next time for a last-minute addition to our list. We're going to be taking on Stephen King's The Dark Tower.